All right, I got it. I can follow directions today. My name is Kate, and I'm an alcoholic. Thank you so much for the introduction. Stephanie has been my sponsor for oh goodness, just coming up on 4 years now. My sobriety date is November 23rd, 1996. I'll get to how I got to Stephanie, because I do. And I was told to talk for about 45, 50 minutes. So hopefully I can keep it that way. I have three lifetimes here. I feel like I've lived three completely different lifetimes. And I don't always like to share a lot of the particulars of my drunkalog, because honestly, I have never heard my story in Alcoholics Anonymous. And I don't want anyone to feel like they're not able to relate. So I'll try to share. I try to share a lot more feelings, because that's what we can all relate to. We really are all the same. The particulars are different. And I know that, when I came in, I definitely had terminal uniqueness. And that's what, Chuck C talks about. We have, our main problem is conscious separation from, is that we can't, we're different. And that's why this is not going to work for us. And that's why we need to drink. And that's why rules don't apply to us. And, this, that, and the other thing. And I suffer from all those things. I was just driving my kids around for a couple hours, dropping one off, picking one up, doing the dance. I've got a 12 and 15-year-old, both girls. God really felt the need to pay me back with two girls, but those girls have never seen me drink. But that does not mean they have not seen my disease of alcoholism, and they say, on the note of Valentine's Day, if you want to find out your character defects, get in a relationship. And then I like to add on to that, if you really want to find out what your character defects are, just have a couple of kids that are just like you. And that's kind of part of really what this phase of my sobriety has gone to, is, how to really practice these principles in all my affairs. And AA has been a spiritual kindergarten for me. And they told me that when I got to AA, they told me that it was going to be a spiritual kindergarten, but I did not understand really what that meant. But I was driving around, and I have a kind of a little rule for myself that if I'm in the car for any more than 20 minutes, where I live in Maryland, everything is 20 minutes away. I've got a speaker tape on. I've got some kind of personal development or a book. I try to continue to just feed all of, not to feed the squirrels in the attic, not to just kind of let myself ruminate within my own head. And I was listening to a guy talk on the third step, and I just went through the third step with a girl, one of the girls I sponsor, last night, and we were reading it. So that might be where I go. I don't know where I'm going to go here, but I did not come from a bad home. I did not come from a home where there was alcohol in my home, and I didn't see alcoholism. I didn't know what an alcoholic was. I really didn't even have an idea of what an alcoholic was. It doesn't mean it's not in my family. My dad had moved us far enough away, so we didn't see that side of the family. Um, we knew Cousin Ricky was in jail, but we didn't know why Cousin Ricky was in jail. And, it wasn't until I got much older until I heard some of the antics, of the family. But I've got great parents who are still married. They celebrated 50 years being married just this past year. And, me and my four siblings took them to Mexico, and you know, we've got mostly, I've got an older sister who, if I was going to bet on an alcoholic, she would be it. But that's not something that's not something that eats my lunch. That's her life, and her choice to make. But I came from this great family, and I came from my dad, teaching me, not to steal and not to lie. And I remember him sitting me down when I wanted to quit ballet, and teach me about what a commitment was, that when you sign up to do something, you finish it out, and maybe you don't go back to it, but you finish what you started. And I rejected all of it. I mean, I am not a ballerina. I didn't give up something I was good at. I've never been accused of being graceful. I've got some talents. That's just not one of them. um, but like they really tried, and I did my absolute best to put them at arm's length. And that started from the time that I was 2 years old. My father would tell you that I'd stopped letting them hug me when I was 2 years old. I had no trauma. My brain just worked differently from, from out the chute. I heard somebody say at a conference last week, and out the chute, I was just restless, irritable, and discontent. And I needed outside things. I never, I never had enough, and no one was going to get too close to me. And I suffered from that well into my sobriety. But because of that, I believe I was an instant alcoholic, just at alcohol. I started drinking probably around 11 years old, and that became my primary focus. And it was not very long into that I became a daily drinker. One of my talent, and I say a daily drinker. There was many substances that were used, but simply because I was so young, like I loved the effects produced by alcohol. And if that's what I could get my hands on, that's what I could get my hands on. But there was, other things that were at a younger age actually easier to procure. Um, but it wasn't very long. And it was one of my talents is lying. I've got a knack for just spinning a yarn that and I was a pretty nice girl for the most part. It got a little hairy later on. But I could always put on a nice front. I came from the nice family. We lived in the suburbs. I really could put it out there that I was pretty unassuming, I guess I would say. And then I always had my different friends, and who had this and who had what. And my best friend was merely out of convenience. I drank with her mom. Her brother was my drug dealer, and she was kind of annoying, but like that was fine because she would go to bed and I'd sit up with her mom and drink until 3 o'clock in the morning. And her mom would let me drive my car. I did not have a license while I was drinking. I was the best drunk driver that I knew, but I was never able to get a license. Wasn't able to get a license because I got caught taking cars that weren't mine. But I didn't get I was a year sober before I was allowed to get my license, which was actually pretty good for me. So say I never really. I had a lot of near misses. I um, had a lot of getting searched in school, right? When I handed off what I had, or there was just it was I, I was I had detention once for 2 months straight. It was like, a lot of kind of here and there. It's suspended for cutting school, which I think is ridiculous that they could take you out of school for not going to school. But, that was fine with me. And they had sat down and had some talks with my parents, and my behavior was, that of a child that was drinking and using drugs. And I just threw this big giant tantrum of how could they think that I would do such a thing? I knew better. That was when the DARE program was real big, is just say no. And nobody really questioned me. I lied every single time I walked out the door to my house. And things, definitely, like I said, they escalated quickly. I was taught good morals and values, and I was 14. I got a job. I bussed tables at a fine dining restaurant. I made more money than any child should have made. But then I also was able to drink every night with the people at the bar. I looked a lot older, so I lived as if I was a lot older. And that really started me thinking that I was an adult. And I really did think I was an adult. And I tried to move out. I told my parents I didn't like the way they had raised me so far, and I'd like to go ahead and finish the job on my own. And the truth is, I didn't like the way they had raised me so far. They loved me. They tried to instill morals and values, and they tried to give me rules. And I didn't like that. I've been grounded for the rest of my life more times than I care to admit. And all I would do is just kind of shake my head and walk out the door. And I did that. And my dad asked me one time, like why? And I'm like, I just have to. And I couldn't put words to it at the time, but I had to go. and I know now that that was just like, you can't, I couldn't be kept. I couldn't, when I needed drink, I was never a white knuckler. I could never have the thought, I need a drink cross my head and white knuckle through that thought of not picking up a drink, which when it turned out that was probably the best thing that could have happened. Because, when I did try to get sober, I never was deluded into thinking that I was going to be successful. But I wound up, long story short, lots of trouble, being brought home by the cops because I kept trying to leave, and I had a grand master plan on how I was going to do this. And I'd started, and I'd like to date the drug dealers because that really just cut out the middleman. So, my next, I guess I would say hostage, because this hostage situation really lasted about 4 years. I got into with this guy who actually did kind of pull me back. He was, we we really stuck to just drinking, and a lot of the hard drugs kind of chilled out for a minute. But as a direct result to his drinking and drug use, wound up very, very sick and wound up in the hospital, and with an IV going straight into his heart. He'd like walk around with his little pole, and his dad was in AA, and his dad had been sober for about 10 years or so at the time, and he grew up in AA. And with some unofficial research, I've noticed that the people who tend to get sober younger have parents in AA. So if my kids ever do pick up a drink, fingers crossed, they've been in AA since, both of them, since they were less than a week old. They've been in AA meetings. But so, I could see, it was clear that alcohol had put him in the spot that he was in. And as the good supportive girlfriend, I showed up to meetings with him. He had really stopped serving me the purpose that I had intended him for. But I knew, because I'm a nice girl, that you don't dump a guy who's got an IV straight in his heart. That's just not a nice thing to do. So I kept him around, and then I just started my side life. So I had, I've have been in, up until I had many long-term relationships, but was never very successful at being monogamous. So I just would keep my foot in the door, and just if he couldn't fill me, I'm searching for something else that can. And I suffer from a disease of not enough. There is not enough love. There is not enough booze. There is not enough drugs. There is not enough money. There's not enough of what is going to fill the hole in my soul that only God can fill. And so we started going to AA, and I thought that that was great. That was great for him. And as much as I really hated happy people, I believe that alcohol kept me alive long enough to get to Alcoholics Anonymous, because I was suicidal before I ever picked up a drink. So before I ever got to AA, I had that I wanted it to end. I just wanted to be out. I got to go. And so we started going to meetings, and I didn't hate you happy people. And I didn't really know why I didn't hate you, because I hated all happy people. But what I realized is that it was, I started to hear you guys were putting words to some of the stuff that I had felt my entire life. And so I didn't hate showing up to meetings. I felt comfortable there. I felt comforted there. That didn't mean my drinking slowed down at all. I really just started leading a very double life. And that guy did end up getting sober. I mean, he kind of had to. So I'd show up to meetings with him, and then I'd have my other life. And he, periodically he would get tired of me lying to him. And, he would always say, you can't BS a BSer, because I'd come over his house, drunk or on a substance, because I thought that was easier to hide. But, he had done it all. When you spot it, you got it, kind of a thing. So he would, we would break up because he couldn't deal with my lying anymore. But again, that really good alcoholic relationship, we just kept sucking back to each other. And I liked going to the meetings, and I'm not sure I ever really went without him. I didn't have a license, but there was a point in time where I was like, and he would always point out stuff that was like wrong with my drinking, like, aren't you drinking for the wrong reasons? And I didn't, like I said, I didn't know anything about alcoholism, so I didn't know that there was a wrong reason to drink. If I had known, I probably would have hid it a little bit better from him. And so, I'd say, don't worry about me. Before things get that out of hand with me, I will, I'll slow down or I'll stop. And like, little did I know, like I was gone by that point. And I would say I spent about a year kind of in this place, a year and more than a year and a half going to meetings with him. But when it came to admitting that I had a problem, saying I was an alcoholic for the first time, it took me about a year to actually get sober after that, because I tried everything that I could come up with. And I could rationalize. I mean, I was really young, and thank God the old timers at that time, and there was all old timers. There wasn't that many young people in my area. They wouldn't say things like "I spilt more than you drank." They would say things like, "Young alcoholics don't live to be old alcoholics, Kate." And I knew that. I knew it was going to be over for me soon. I just didn't know how. I didn't know if I was going to die or if I was going to get sober. But it came up, a situation came up, and I could not rationalize how that wasn't completely powerlessness and unmanageability. Like, I could rationalize it up until that point, but I was just done. So I admitted, I was an alcoholic. I went and picked up a 24-hour chip, and I thought, all right, I'm going to get sober now, and that's going to be it. And it wasn't it. It was just, it was just headed into a year of just hell, of a belly full of beer and a head full of AA. And if anybody who's been in the meeting has experienced that, it's just it just feels like selling your soul. I mean, I was selling my soul for things, for booze and drugs, for a lot longer, but it was it was just so dark every time I drank, and I didn't mean to drink. And it was just time and time and time again. And I mean, I would sit and I would drink and I would listen to Bob Marley, and I couldn't listen to Bob Marley for years after I got sober, just because of how I felt, because I just did it again and I didn't mean to do it. I had tried something different to not drink that particular night, that particular day. I tried all the things. There's a paragraph in the big book that gives this little list of things that we tried. I tried all of those things, and not a single one of them worked. And like I said, thank God, not a single one of them worked. So I spent, just kept, and thank God I had a home group. And if this home group could have loved me sober, they absolutely would have loved me sober. And I would have let them. If they could have done the work for me, they would have. And I would have happily let them do the work for me, because I was looking for an easier, softer way. Like, I was looking for a way for your AA program not to be the way for me to get sober. And then it just came to a point where I gave up. I embarrassed myself horribly at this guy's family event. I was supposed to be sober, and I was not sober. And I maintained the whole time that night at that party that I was sober, and it was very evident that I was not sober. And I gave up. I actually, that night, it was anyway. And I thought, like I said, I don't have that many talents, and drinking was one of them. I was kind of a savant. Like I said, instant alcoholic, just at alcohol. I could drink longer and harder, and my companionship didn't always get lower. It got older. So it just looked different. And I was, in seedy places with seedy people, crossing lines that I never thought that I would cross. Certainly not a nice girl like me. Just gross, just really, really gross. So I went on a 3-week run, and I just, I did more and worse, and these things that I just, it really got that first step nailed down perfectly. And that's what the 12 and 12 tells me. The only thing I have to do, is the only thing I have to do perfectly in Alcoholics Anonymous is that first step. And thank God, because that's the only thing I have done perfect, is I haven't picked up a drink. But at the end of that 3 weeks, I stumbled into a meeting late one Sunday night, and I heard something that I'm sure I had heard 100 times before. I heard that it didn't have to be that way anymore. And I knew it. Like, I knew it. I'd watched you people, and I knew you weren't lying, because I went to your dances and I went to your like conferences. I hung out with you people. Like, I knew that it didn't have to be this way. I knew you weren't miserable and sober. I mean, I knew that you were still, crazy and kooky, and didn't need alcohol to have fun. But I still did. I just felt like I literally needed alcohol to breathe. I felt like I needed alcohol to relax that knot in my chest enough just to be able to take a deep breath, just to be able to walk out of the house, just be able to have a conversation. And so, that night, it was really the end for me. Hang on one second. I better let my dog out. He won't stop crying. I'm so sorry. That was worse than a crying baby. I couldn't focus at all. I really do apologize. Um, so I kind of really felt like that was a psychic change for me that night. And the compulsion to drink was removed and I was done. And I was like ready to move on. I was like, cool, don't want to drink. The thought I need to drink, it's not coming to my head. I made it through that whole week. And I had this, I had this my friend pick me up, and alcohol was in front of my face one more time after that. And that was November 22nd. And I didn't need a drink that night. I didn't want to drink that night. And there have been many times that I've been sitting in front of alcohol and not wanted to drink it. There's many times that I've had that argument. I'm not sure if anybody here has had the argument where they're sitting staring at a drink and they don't want to drink it and having the conversation. And I lost that conversation every single time. And I just lost it one more time when I really thought that compulsion had been lifted. And I was done. And I did the craziest thing. I asked for help, which I had never done before. All these people were trying to help me and trying to get me sober and trying to give me suggestions. And I just didn't care. I needed to figure it out myself. I needed to figure out my way of doing this, the easier, softer way. And when I did that, when I finally asked for help, I admitted that I couldn't, that somebody else could, and that I was going to let them. And I didn't know that at the time. I really had a pretty strong opposition to God at the time. But it took about 4 months. I eventually did. I got a sponsor. I actually needed a sponsor for a whole month. I got into an outpatient treatment. I got into an outpatient treatment program at like 23 days. So I know sure as anything that that outpatient treatment center did not keep me sober, because before that point, I had never made it more than 10 days within that whole year. So might have kept me busy. I wasn't willing, because I remember they try to give you these little dittos to fill out, what they have to do with feelings and stuff. And I wasn't willing to look at any feelings. So I would just slide them back their ditto. But I was also like, you couldn't tell me what to do. That was 90% of my problem at home and in school, is that I don't take directions well. So, I graduated from that program, but it was not because I did any of the work. But about 30 days, my pink cloud popped. And I got the sponsor that they were talking about, and she was young and she was cute and she had a boyfriend, and that's, why I picked her. And so we started to go through the steps, and first step, no problem, did that one perfectly. Second step, nah, I'm not a big God fan, so we'll just, maybe skip over that. And oh crap, the third step has to do with God too. So, we kind of went back and forth on that a bit, and she probably got frustrated enough with me at some point to just say, Kate, why don't you quit looking for where God isn't and start looking for where God is? And that was a point that really everything had changed for me when it came to, and I'm going to say God, but I mean higher power. I've got no physical being attached to my God. It's just 3 letters and it's 1 syllable and it's really short. And I've got a car in the driveway, and you all pretty much know what a car looks like. It's going to get me from point A to point B, but you don't know the make, model, year, whatever. And that doesn't honestly matter. So I'm going to say God just for brevity purposes. But gosh, and it's funny, when you start looking for something, be it bad or good, that's where you're going to find it. And before, all I was looking for is where God wasn't. So I'm finding all the examples of where God wasn't in my life, where it's completely ridiculous on my part, because merely by the fact that I was still alive by half of the asinine stuff that I did, there has to be a God, because I was not a very smart young girl in the things and the places that I chose to go. And the fact that I came out relatively unscathed with trauma is pretty magical. So I can't attach that now to anything other than God. But when I started to look for him, I started to see that that was indeed miraculous. I started to see sunrises. I saw a rainbow one time. And that was just kind of like my first real spiritual experience of just knowing that everything was going to be okay. And it was. And I was actually going to a driving class because I was finally allowed to get my license, because it's, when you stop lying to everybody and act in all kinds of shady, relationships did start to improve. My family relationships started to improve. Everything started to improve. And so I was able to work towards getting my license up until that point. And at that point, we were working on step 5. And I'm not sure, or step 4, pardon me. And I'm not sure if I just was really fried, or what, but I didn't understand that the 5th step in the big book. So my sponsor had me answer these questions out of the Hazelton guide, which got me far enough. It got me telling you guys, telling my dark and dirties. And I will tell you, I don't think I did the steps out of the big book until I had 6.5 years. I think I did half of most of the steps. I got rid of all my dark and dirties, those 2 things. Everybody's got 2 things that they're not going to share with anybody. I shared them. And it's funny, I was actually talking to my husband about this, because he had 2 things. Every 5th step he's ever heard has 2 things. Every 5th step I've ever heard has 2 things. Actually, every 5th step I've heard, the only column that really changes is the first one. Everything else is pretty much the same. So those 2 things are, mostly the same. But I asked him, I said, do you remember what your 2 things are? And he says, well, I remember one. I said, well, I remember one, but we don't even remember what our second one is anymore. And it's probably because I share it so regularly with other women that it's not something that defines me anymore. And it's not something that I'm really that humiliated by. And I'm not that girl either. Um, but that was really kind of as far as I went. And I was, like I said, things were getting better. I moved to South Florida to go to college. I didn't like the way they did AA there, so I went, but I didn't do a whole lot. I got a sponsor, I got a home group, but I didn't do a whole lot. I was really excited about God, so I actually went to a Christian college, which is really entertaining, because I really just went to find all the holes in the Bible, because I was really just kind of getting okay with God, and I could hear the word Jesus Christ, and I could convert it to God, and I could get the principles. But I still didn't, want to understand it as like a history lesson when they were teaching it as a history lesson. And so I wound up living, and this is kind of really where this was about a year and a half, sobriety. Where things started to really go downhill. I admitted that I was powerless over alcohol, that alcohol had made my life unmanageable. I did not really believe that I couldn't manage the rest of my life. I memorized, I admitted there was a power greater than myself that could restore me to sanity. But if you stop using him, it's not really all that helpful. I memorized that 3rd step prayer, but I had no concept, because I'm still trying to manage my own life, of what that 3rd step really, really meant. And I've done a 4th step, but I have not looked at the actions that I had taken to cause all of those resentments. That 4th column was non-existent, because I did it in paragraph and question form. And then I had memorized the 7th step prayer. Maybe I had made an 8th step list, but I had not made any amends. I wasn't willing to part with money that wasn't mine. And I really wasn't ready to say that I was wrong yet. And so I start living in South Florida, just like that. And what happens is I start living like an untreated alcoholic. There are friends that I had in South Florida that honestly did not know that I didn't drink, just because of the way that I acted. And when it was time to go, I just left. And I had a serious boyfriend at the time who thought that we were going to get married. And I just decided I got to go. I had really made a pretty big mess of things. I'd given myself a stomach ulcer. And the only thing I never did was pick up a drink. I'm throwing up what looks like coffee grinds, which is the only reason I assumed that I had a stomach ulcer, and not knowing what the heck is going on. But I'd stopped praying. I'm sure I wasn't talking to my sponsor. And if I was doing AA, it was only the fellowship. So I come back to Maryland. I'm done with school. I'd failed out pretty much. I had a .08 GPA. I had too much fear to even go into the office and withdraw from classes. I just stopped showing up. I just couldn't face anything. I was paralyzed by all of this self-centered fear. And I come back up and I start living the same way. This boyfriend keeps calling, and I don't understand why he keeps calling, because I've moved out of the state. And I think out of sight, out of mind. When this guy was absolutely destroyed, and that was actually one of the two relationships that I made amends to. I caused a lot of damage, but generally I don't make amends in past relationships, because usually we're fishing for something else. But he was from the Bahamas, and he dropped his life in Florida and he went back to the Bahamas. I completely destroyed him. He thought we were getting married, and I just pieced out and couldn't understand why he kept calling. And my mom was sick at the time. She was in the hospital for about 2 months, and I kept saying it's because my mom's in the hospital. I got too much going on. But then as I'm, later down the road, I'm realizing I never even went to visit my mother in the hospital at that time, because it was so consumed with self-centered fear, which again, when I did make amends, I had to go back and make amends for my mom for never visiting her in the hospital when she was there for 2 months. But then that was my excuse for not picking up the phone for this dude. So, I mean, it was things like that. I'm getting jobs. I'm going through a lot of jobs. I'm stealing from them. I'm just kind of just grasping at straws to fill Kate up. I'm showing up at AA. I'm still going to 5 or 6 meetings a week. I'm drinking your coffee. I'm reciting all the things that I've been hearing for now 3, 4, 5, 6 years. I'm in another relationship that I have no business being in, that I can't stay faithful in, that is another, very tumultuous on and off again relationship. And I get some sponsors, because I think a sponsor is going to hold me accountable. And, my sponsor's biggest fault, honestly, was believing me when I smiled and I told her I was fine. And I knew all these things were wrong. And so I tried other 12-step programs, and it turns out that, another 12-step program isn't going to fix me. Some spiritual literature and not going to fix me, because I'm not I'm not praying or meditating either. I'm not doing any of the things really, but showing up your meetings, drinking your coffee, hanging out. And if a girl that asks me to sponsor her, I'll do it when it's convenient for me. I will give her the time, when it's convenient for me. And what I truly find is, if you're not inconvenienced by Alcoholics Anonymous on a regular basis, then you're not working the program. You're working the program I'm working the program according to myself. I'll say that. I remember hearing when I first got sober, is the cafeteria style AA, is taking what you want and leaving the rest. And I think that's probably one of the most dangerous things that we could ever say to a newcomer, because taking what I want is what got me to Alcoholics Anonymous. So I don't know what I want. I don't know what I need to leave. And there is not a darn thing in this program yet that I have found that I can leave. I need all of the tools that Alcoholics Anonymous has given to me. So I wind up again. I am, I've destroyed my life. My finances are absolutely terrible. There's negatives in my bank accounts. I can't pay, they, give kids credit card. And I just got myself in this big giant hole, and I've, had phones smashed because I get caught doing things I'm not supposed to, be doing. And this dude's in AA too. And he's starting to tell the people in AA what I'm doing. And so there's a lot of shame there. But I still didn't ever stop going. I just, maybe went to some different meetings. But what happened is, of course, there had to be some, great, big, horrifying, experience to happen. And a dude, and actually a really good friend came up to me, and thank God that he was able to tell me the truth and tell me what a giant disaster that I was, with all of the love that he could. And he said, "Kate, let me take you to some women who can help you." And he took me to a meeting that I had never been to before, because I stay within my circle of meetings, because they know me, they're safe, they're not going to ask questions. They think I have 6.5 years, so I must be okay. And I generally think that I'm okay, because I have 6.5 years, so I must be okay, because I think that's kind of like the rule, because I don't know any better. And so he put me in front of these women who absolutely could see through me. And I knew they could see through me from the moment I walked into that meeting. And I walked in there like a newcomer, big doe eye, completely ego. My ego was smashed. The gig was up for me. I had been kind of caught and just kind of rolled myself over so many times. And I was done. And it was a Monday night. These women told me where to go on Thursday night. There's this meeting in downtown Baltimore. It's not there anymore, but it was 200-300 people in this giant church. It was a speaker meeting. There was no air conditioning, and nothing more than a room full of people that I don't know. I really don't like people I don't know. And it was hot, and they could all see me, and I knew they could see me. But thank God it was a speaker meeting, so I wasn't thinking about what I was going to say when I got called on the whole time, which probably wasn't in any danger of doing. But this woman got up, and I don't have any idea what she said, but I knew that she could help me. I knew that she had the answer. And I don't even know how this happened, but the room just kind of parted after the meeting, and I walked up to her, and it was the second time that I was able to ask for help. So that was my second surrender, and that surrender was to Kate. And asking for help is really kind of still the hardest thing for me to do. And she was like, and I didn't want to ask her to sponsor me because I thought that was a bit of a commitment. So I asked her to take me through the steps, and she told me where to meet her back at that other meeting on Monday night. And we got through the first three steps. I can, he can, let him. And like, I knew that I was done. And so she gave me 4-step directions right off the bat. And she gave me that fourth column, which I had never seen. I didn't even know existed. Turns out all my answers the whole time were in that darn blue book that you guys have been holding up for all these years. And we did the 4-step out of that book. And I finally sat in front of another woman and told her exactly who and what I was. And I wasn't the nice girl that I tried to show everybody that I was. Now, granted, I said I didn't look like all that nice little girl, but I really tried to put on a good front. And so I sat in front of her, and she pointed out on that fourth column, and it was self-centered, self-seeking, all of the selves that we could come up with. And I started to see that, holy crap, all my problems are of my own making. And I guess y'all have been telling me that the whole time. I just never heard it. And she said, there's good news and there's bad news. She says, the good news is you can walk out of here free, and you don't ever have to be this girl again. And these things don't ever have to define you, the things that you've done. So that's the good news. But the bad news is that they're all of your own making. So that means the solution has to come from within you also. And that was God. And to move on with the rest of the steps and to clear the rest of the blocks between me and God. So from that moment to now, we've been clearing the blocks from God. And I was telling the girl that I sponsored the other day, and I'm a big outdoors beach person, just anything with sunshine and just being outside. And I said, it's like being on the beach, and there's a ton of other people from the beaches down in Maryland. I mean, there are umbrellas as far as you can see, and everybody's under the umbrellas. But that does not mean that there's any less sun on the beach. It just means that there's all these blocks from the sun. And then as these people leave and their umbrellas go, there's less blocks from the sun, so it looks like there's more sun on the beach. And the same thing with a cloudy day. Just because the clouds are in the sky doesn't mean the sun's not shining. So what we're doing is just removing the clouds, removing the umbrellas, so the sunlight of the spirit can shine on us. And I can feel that. I can feel the sun on my skin, and I can truly feel God. And when it's a cloudy day and I'm in a good spiritual place, I can still feel the sunshine on my face, and I can still feel God, because I don't have those things. I don't have the past. I don't have that girl hanging over my head and the things that I've done, because I don't do them anymore. That's the important part. And I asked her one time, I said, Jessica is my sponsor's name at the time. I said, how do I stop lying? I've been lying for so long. I don't know how to stop lying. She said, Kate, stop doing shit you got to lie about. And it just didn't ever occur to me to stop lying. And I'm, pardon my language, but that's how she said it to me. And it was just so blunt, and it was so matter of fact, that it never occurred to me, because I had to lie to get what I want, to feel the way that I needed to feel. So whatever I had to tell you, I had to tell you. But as soon as I stopped doing that, I realized the truth will do. The truth will always do. As soon as I start negotiating something in my head about why I'm late or why I can't do something, if I circle back, I can always come back to the truth, and the truth will always do as to, why I can't be someplace, why I was late, and whatever it is. Those are just random excuses. I mean, random things that I came up with. But the truth will always do as long as I'm living with what I feel is right between me and God. I came up, I have a lot of little rules for myself, but another little rule for myself is if there's any one person that I don't want to tell about what I'm going to go do, that I'm not allowed to go do it. Because I found myself, and it's a silly example, I was going to join a gym on a family membership with a friend. And I mean, that's dishonest. So I was trying to figure out ways to tell it so it sounded better to my sponsor, or to a friend, or to somebody else, or to the person at the gym. And so those little things, like I can't get away with doing anymore. I can't get away with, afford telling those little lies if I'm not going to be honest with anybody and everybody about exactly what I'm going to go do. So it's kind of a good barometer for me on, what's God's will and what's Kate's will. If there's somebody I'm going to have to explain it to, or if there's anybody I don't want to have to tell, then it's probably not God's will. If I'm in collision with anyone or anything, I'm probably living under self-will. So these are the kind of just like the little things. My sponsor tried to start showing me how to live as a woman with grace and dignity, and how to behave as a woman. And she walked me through the traditions as we're walking through the rest of the steps. Yeah, I did make all my amends. I cleared away all those blocks. I live in those growth steps of 10, 11, and 12. And they're not maintenance steps because I'm not maintaining anything. My job in Alcoholics Anonymous is to grow. If it's a spiritual kindergarten, I need to keep growing, and I need to use these tools, these principles, and put them everywhere in my life. And I need to do all of the things that sound like terrible ideas. Like when I got here, none of these things sounded like they were going to fix me. None of these things sounded like a good idea. And up until that point in my life, Kate did what Kate wanted to do, and that's all Kate did. And like I said, take what I want and leave the rest. And I pretty much took the fellowship and left the rest. And so as we, it's like, as we go on, she's walking me through the traditions. We're walking through the rest of the steps. I'm becoming this whole different person. I'm doing like these esteemable acts. I'm paying all my bills. Like I got a job that I could respect, and that I was helping people. And I was working with her, and I was working with all these other people in AA, and little by slowly, she promised me that if I put myself in the center of Alcoholics Anonymous, she's like, I can't make you many promises. There's probably one absolute she told me, and one promise. She said, I promise if you put yourself in the center of AA, that all these problems that you've created will go away. And I said, that doesn't make any sense. She's like, well, this program is full of spiritual axioms. God either is or he isn't. What is your choice to be? And whenever I'd come at her with, some big problem, some new thing, some whatever it was, she would just kind of shrug her shoulders and say, I guess your God's got to get bigger. And as I walked through these things, little by slowly, my God got bigger. And I developed this relationship with a God where it's like, I know that like he's got my back, and that I know that his plan is always better than mine. And how it started is by just doing the things that I really didn't want to do, and in direct proportion to how much I didn't want to do them is how much I grew. And I still had a little ego left, so I still had she still would have to elbow me from time to time. So, if she was going to a meeting, that meant that was the meeting that we were going to. When she sat in the front row and tapped the seat next to her, that meant that's where I was supposed to sit. When she threw an elbow at me in the middle of the meeting, that meant I was supposed to listen to whatever the speaker was talking about, because the speaker was talking to me. We went to primarily speaker meetings, and we drove all over the place to go to these speaker meetings. She actually put me in a car with some strangers and sent me up to Boston for a mini conference sometime. And I just said, okay. And I was told that's the most spiritual thing that you can ever say in Alcoholics Anonymous is okay. I did things that didn't make sense. I drove a half an hour south to go to a meeting a half an hour north of me. And I said, that didn't make sense. And she told me I was I was out of the management business. I'd been fired. I was a poor manager, and that for now, I was going to just be following directions. And we actually, my grant sponsor at the time, and her, this is the only time she actually told me what to do. I finally, she'd been sponsoring me probably about a year. I'd been out of relationships because we've seen what happens to Kate in relationships. And I'd gotten rid of that girl. But I had finally, after making an ideals list, and making this ridiculous ideals list of all of these demands that I had in a partner, a legal sheet full of suggestions for God of this person that I want to eventually meet. She said that's a tall order, and I'm not sure if that person exists, but she said if that person does exist, she says you also have to be that person in this relationship. And it's funny, A does a lot of trickery. In the fifth step, you're writing all your resentments, thinking you're going to get your chance to really tell somebody how much this world has wronged you. But what you come out of that with is how wrong you were and how you caused all of these people to act in accordance. And the same thing, more trickery, all spiritual axioms. You got to give it away to keep it. Anything that I'm going to grow from is a spiritual axiom because I don't know what's good for me. But she said, I've got to be this person. And she said, and then, you also can't date anybody that doesn't have all of these things. So that, limits my pool for a little while. But I did, long story short, end up dating this person who I didn't even date. I actually went on a lot of first dates for about a year, which was pretty entertaining because alcoholics don't date well. The second date is move-in day is our joke around here. I'm sure you all have similar jokes. But I went a lot on first dates and that was it. And I got to, I spent a year. I spent this time really falling in love with who I was and who I was becoming, and being proud of who I was and who I was becoming. So then by the time I got into this relationship was just an addition to who I was. This was going to be the first, little trip that I had with this new boyfriend, and I was going to meet all of his friends because he wasn't from Maryland. And she said, well, actually, we're going to go to Toronto and we're going to go to the International Convention. And she said, if I'm ever really going to tell you what to do, this is it. And I just said, okay, because that's what I was taught to say. So I got in the car with them and we drove to Toronto and we went to the International Convention. And it wasn't any great miraculous thing, but what I will tell you is the willingness to get in the car instead of doing what I wanted to do. I really do think was one of the pivotal reasons that the relationship that I was in at the time was successful. And I've been married to that man for 16 years now. And we have the two kids, and I absolutely have stood on the shoulders of giants in Alcoholics Anonymous. I've been so lucky. To have had these women show me how to be a woman, to how to love and to how to be loved, and how to be in a relationship, be with anybody, on what to give, and focus on what to give as opposed to what to get. I had Sammy G from Richmond was my grant sponsor for a while, and she would say, treat him like a king, Kate. And I would absolutely bristle with antagonism because I'm not that kind of girl. But she said, and he will in turn treat you like a queen. And I can absolutely tell you that is how my marriage is. And it's, it's amazing. And I have not had one falter, on whether or not I ever wanted to be faithful to that man, because that girl is long since gone. And I will, close a little bit with this. The woman who was my sponsor and who taught me everything I needed to know about being a woman in Alcoholics Anonymous, moved to a real small town, walked her way out of Alcoholics Anonymous and picked up a drink. And I will say it was probably one of the most painful experiences in my sobriety, because she is the one person who saw me, knew who and what I was. And one of my biggest fears was always going back to being that woman again. And I was so afraid of ever telling another woman who and what I was, and not having her have seen the psychic change that occurred. So that when she went away, first of all, I cried for like 2 weeks, all selfishly. And I prayed for about a year for God to show me who I was gonna walk with next. And Stephanie ended up speaking at a women's retreat that I helped start and that I go to every year. And what Stephanie did is something that I had been aspiring to do, is that she cried. I also have not been very good at that. I'm getting a lot better at that. But she cried and she was happy and she was unapologetic for it and she loves unconditionally. And so I've been having a new experience for the past 4 years with Stephanie, and looking at things a little bit differently and being a little bit gentler on myself, and being gentler on myself, has also been, also knowing that I've got two teenage girls who are watching me, and they see, when I'm restless, irritable, and discontent. They see it, and they sometimes they get the butt of it sometimes, and I don't want that to be part of who they are and how they're raised. So I've heard stories of women alcoholics and what happens to their children, and I don't want that to be my story. And so, now the wisdom for me is continuing to do all of the things in all of the areas of my life. I didn't even get into all of how, God has led me through each one of my career paths that I absolutely stiff armed him on with each one, and how I've been led to help people in a new and unique way where they also in turn helped me, just like we do with the newcomers. Um, and that's how alcohol, in every phase of my recovery, there's been a new way that God put something in front of me that I stiff arm, that I also get to grow through and grow from. And that hopefully, I can take this and show somebody else. And, I have, the girls that I sponsor who, we've been in a big book study at my house every other Thursday for about 5 or 6 years. And we've walked through each other's lives together. And to be transparent in all of my fallacies, I'm not, don't want to come on here and be perfect, because I'm not. And so I still get the opportunity and look forward to growing, and being vulnerable and transparent in Alcoholics Anonymous, and never think that, like I did at 6.5 years, that I'm just, I've got 26 years now, so I should just be okay and look okay. No, I love nothing more than to tell y'all how I mess up royally, and how I grow through that. And that's our experience, strength, and hope here. And that if somebody else doesn't have the experience, that I might be able to be uniquely helpful to somebody else, because I'm not trying to to be any kind of a bleeding deacon here or the AA police. I'm just another bozo on the bus. And then I'm glad that I got to, that you guys all showed up on Valentine's Day and listened to me ramble on well past 9 o'clock. So I'm going to go ahead and turn it back over. Thank you.